Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Software Engineering Mini Lectures. Today we're going to go over team collaboration and management. This is something that's pretty big, it's pretty important. We only have 2 slides here, but we'll jump right into it. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about is task management. And what really this means is just being able to distribute and organize all of the work that we have. Basically, it's breaking down our master schedule that we talked about in the last lecture into different stories, epic stories, tasks, depending on really how you want to organize it. Sometimes, depending on the project, if it's a very large project, like the project I'm working on, True Course has around 200 people. We have these end-to-end capabilities, and we have to break them down into kind of like an epic hierarchy. Epic, which is a very large thing. Then it's broken down into other stories, and then which is then broken down into tasks. So you can think of maybe an epic as part of a website, like entering the login credentials or being able to log into a website. There's many few pieces to that. Maybe a story would be the designing the user interface, designing the backend, making sure that all of that comes together. And so maybe the task would be like coming up with the type of requirements or the design, doing the implementation, doing the test, test that you have to make sure that it's working the way you want it to do. Doing some maybe validation on the user interface or some validation on in the database, and then maybe part of the review. So those are different types of tasks that we can have here. And for task management, there's many different task managements out there, and I don't think there's really any better one over the other than they're just different options. I know that if you're working in GitHub and GitLab, they have it built in so that when you make commits into the repository, you can assign those numbers into the commit message, and it can kind of like automatically track that task. And you can see the progress of that task, which is kind of nice. There's Trello, which is very easy to use. With swim lane, you can create your own kind of your boards and swim lanes. And there's Jira, which is very popular within the working industry. There's Rally, I think it's Rally CA. I think it's been bought a couple times. And then there's something called UTrack. That's something that I recently come across. It integrates well with GitLab. I think really any of these ones kind of integrate well with GitHub or GitLab, and whether it's important or not to have that linking, it's up to what the project wants. But so that's kind of the idea of task management. Excuse me. So for project management, this is really maybe not. It could be used for specific individual contributors, but the idea here is if you're in the role of a project management and you want to try to get everyone in your team, or if you're a team leader, you want to get everyone rallied together and working on the same goal. Really, one of the big things is getting to know your team, knowing how they work, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, knowing how to place your team members so that you have the most effective team. So also, if you are working in very large teams, getting to know the other team leads, because those are the people you're going to be interacting with, especially if you have dependencies on each other and need to work that out, whether it's interfaces or some type of communication protocols or anything like that. So something that's pretty good. Communication is definitely something that's really big. I'll touch upon that in the next slide. Also, part of project management is setting high, clear expectations. High maybe is relative depending on what you think, but setting those expectations, and when I do say high, I mean setting them into a good bar where you're trying to get people to reach maybe a little bit more, setting it a little bit higher than you want people to reach. Because if you don't really set expectations up front, it's difficult to come in the back from a leader standpoint and say, hey, unless there's some easy way to do that, which is usually difficult to increase your expectations down the road versus up front. Well, or just set like, these are the expectations. I know that right now we're not going to be able to get there, but these are our expectations once we get fully up and running. So the idea is there that we want to make sure that people understand what they're trying to accomplish. We're trying to get the requirements done the end of this week, or we're trying to get this feature done by the next quarter or something like that, and then maybe bring it way back at, well, how do we get to the next quarter? Well, we have to do this and this and this, and using those task management tools to help manage those expectations, and having a clear, actually that's another good one, in task management, setting a clear definition of done, because that's something that can be very tricky. If you don't have a clear definition of done, then it could be, as an individual contributor, difficult to understand when something is being able to just mark complete. So having that clear definition of done is pretty good. So we'll move on to the next slide, talking about communication and perfection. So I think communication is probably one of the number one things that you can do, that you want to do well on a project. And then we'll talk about perfection. Perfection can be littered on pretty much any single concept that we have. But number one thing I would say is literally you want to over communicate, because having no communication is the worst thing, because the team members, they don't know what they're doing, and you don't have them, give them a purpose or meaning for what they're understanding, or if they get stuck, or if they don't have a clear understanding of what they're trying to do, then they can become unmotivated, and you're not getting the most out of them. So you want to over communicate, and I think you want to make sure you communicate in different ways, such as emails, one-on-ones, team meetings, project meetings, which is kind of like an all hands, video tutorials, wikis. All of these things are really good, and each individual person understands and digests information in different ways. So that's why over communicating, I know that especially from a project management leadership standpoint, it's sometimes difficult to measure like the value of that type of stuff, but it really is invaluable. You want to make sure that you try to use many different communication channels, or organize it in a way that's saying this type of communication is always going to be done this way. And so the value of something like email has definitely dropped off since the beginning. I've been working, not as many people are reading their emails, so that's why you need to do other unique ways of trying to get that information across. So now we're jumping into perfection. I really think that perfection is, or trying to be good, can be very crippling to projects, because I think that understanding what the customer wants and getting to there as fast as possible, and iterating over what the customer wants, is more important than trying to get it right the first time. I have very little ever seen anything right the first time, and we'll talk about waterfall versus agile and about that. But yeah, so I think that someone can get near to the end, 80%, 90%, and they're just trying to get this thing so perfect that maybe isn't something the customer wants. So that's another thing there. Bring value to the customer. Make sure you understand what they're asking, give them what they're asking for, not anything overboard. And I talked about that. I talk about this as gold plating. Like, giving them anything extra can be a nice thing, but sometimes if it's not something they're paying for, then we shouldn't be doing it at all. So definitely giving the customer what they want. Don't go overextending yourself, because then you get into situations where you're not going to be able to deliver everything that the customer is asking for. And then we did talk about clear definition done. So I think this is a good wrap up for team collaboration and management, and we'll end this there. So thanks all for joining, and we will stop here.